the first.
That's my first one. 2 on 1. Be nice to me. Thanks for coming in. Should we start by talking about what Mind is and what they do?
Yeah, sure. Do you want to go ahead?
So Mind actually has been going since 1947, as long as the NHS actually. And our job has always been to provide free-to-access support in our local communities across England and Wales. We're a federation of 110 local charities that make up Mind. At a national level, we campaign for better mental health and well-being. We've got 3 campaigns currently. One is about improving access to support for our children and young people, really important. The second one is about anti-racism and providing culturally and diverse appropriate services. And the third thing is about reforming our mental health hospitals, which are we have some very good people working in our mental health hospitals, but they are incredibly under-resourced, and actually for most of us, when we're sectioned, they do more damage to us than they do good. And then at a local level, we're all about providing free-to-access support for people in our communities and making sure that when they need support, hopefully at an early stage, but increasingly at the point of crisis, we're there to provide people with better mental health.
You've been asked that question before, haven't you?
I might have been a few
What a
times.
pro. Yeah, what a pro. So obviously, when we're talking mental health, the reason I am in that field or am very interested about it was because I suffered myself. I've worked with a lot of men who have suffered. What were the reasons for you both getting involved with Mind and wanting to make a positive impact on people's mental health?
Who do you want to go first?
Oh, for me, on a personal level, like I'm a marketing background, but only in the last sort of 5 or 6 years, and before then more broader commercial businesses I've worked for. So I was kind of on the lookout for a new marketing role, and this kind of came up around the exact time when I was looking for something that was more fulfilling and something I felt very passionate about. I lost my brother 15 years ago, and he took his own life after having many sort of mental health related illnesses over the years. And so for me, it was my perfect job. And so I only started with Mind about 3 months ago. Okay. So it's kind of a big learning curve, but something I'm so passionate about. And, obviously when you're passionate about something, you can do a good job. So that's kind of why I just knew this role would be for me. So
So we're talking about Ben, your brother, who was 32?
He was 32, yes. I mean, Ben has always been a bit of a complicated character. He's very easily led. He was with a group of mates at school when he probably first started showing signs of having mental health problems from about 11 or 12, 13. He was one of the first out of his mates to start smoking, and then worse. I think he's tried every drug going. And so it's always been a bit of a chicken and egg thing with my brother. I think you often thought, did he have like an addictive personality? Was that what triggered him to try things like drugs? And did that have a knock-on effect to his mental health, or was it the other way around? So we'll never really know. And I often say, if he had grown up in my children's generation, the support and the awareness and the reduced stigma, there's still a way to go, but I think if he had been in that sort of era, would his outcome have been different? He certainly had a lot of support with he was in and out of St Michael's Hospital in Warwick over the years, and he also had help from, I think, Springfield Mind, as it was then. So who knows how the outcome could have been different for him. He was diagnosed as being borderline schizophrenic, although me and my mum question whether or not that really was the case. But I wonder, did he have bipolar disorder, for example? Was he autistic? And, you know, that is so much more widely talked about now that could have been an avenue that could have been explored. But certainly up until the years, probably the 7 or 8 years he was before he died, he was certainly in quite a bad place and very, very unpredictable. Sometimes he'd be up, sometimes he'd be down. And, you know, he was in trouble with the police sometimes. So it was a really, really difficult time. And made worse by the fact that 3 weeks after he died, my dad was diagnosed with metastatic melanoma. And he ended up passing away 5 months after that as well. So, and Ben was my only sibling. So it's just, I've obviously got my own kids now and my own family, but in terms of that immediate family at that time, it was just like me and mom. So it was a challenging time. So
do you have a gut instinct of whether, so if more help had been available then, do you think he would have turned things around, or is there a part of you that thinks about determinism and it was always going to be like this and it always would have been like this? Do you ever sit and contemplate things like that?
Yeah, I've contemplated it a hell of a lot. And I think I spoke at his funeral and I called him like a modern day Peter Pan. He didn't want to grow old. He couldn't cope with people moving on, me marrying, having kids, and he used to love going on holiday with his cousins, and you know, a wider family, camping in France, and he would have wanted to do that the rest of his life. You know, I said at his funeral, and everyone said to me, he was so young, and I said, yeah, but actually, sometimes I actually think he wasn't meant to grow old, and sometimes I think he could have done it years ago because it wasn't the first time he tried. When he did actually try, the couple of weeks before he died, he was actually really well, or so I thought. And when he died, he actually left his phone on charge. So it was kind of one of those. And in the inquest, he jumped in front of a coach on Europa Way, so local to here, and the coroner said, you know, it was a very split-second decision. He almost did it to see what happened. It's very difficult. So I always say he took his own life, but I don't think he meant to kill himself. So who knows, you know?
Yeah,
I'm not sure I've really answered the question.
No, you have. It's complex, isn't it? It's interesting you say that. I was doing some study yesterday. So one of the signs sometimes that we think is a positive that is actually a bit alarming is when people reach a sense of calm a couple of weeks before they do something that they might regret. It's like almost come to peace with the situation and how it is and how it's going to end. And they say that can be sometimes a sign that...
I 100% agree with that. And actually... it so happened that it had already been planned. My mom had planned to go and bought a ticket for a group clairvoyant thing in Stratford. And she didn't feel she could go, understandably, because it was 5 days after Ben died. So it was before the funeral. And so I went instead, and he came through. Whether you believe this stuff or not, but some of the stuff they were saying was just like spot on, you know. And one of the things they said, first of all they questioned, was he a bit different? And I said, yeah, he was, you know, he was a bit different. And they brought through a couple of names of his close friends, and he just looked at me and he said he'd had enough. He was ready to call it a day. And there was nothing more he had to give. So, and I actually found that quite reassuring. And obviously, you know, believe it or not, but, you know, it felt, I think the whole reason it happened for me was a sign for me that he wanted to tell me it was okay. Yeah. So it's, I wasn't going to blub. I'm not going to deep breath, but yeah. So it's, it kind of gave me that kind of sense of calm that I do think I could never visualise the future with Ben and think about him there. And I know that's difficult because I think of my own kids and think sometimes you can't visualise them as adults. But with him, it was different. I think I just couldn't ever see where he was going to go. You know, I didn't want it to happen, but it's sort of, it did help me, you know, feel better, and it was certainly something that helped you kind of come to terms with that grief.
Yeah, I think Steve Neal was the first person on the podcast that ever kind of challenged me and made me think that not everybody can be saved. He said something to me and it sent shivers up my spine. Still does now. It's quite a hard hitting thing. He said, some people just want to go home, and they're going to go home no matter what we do or what we say. And I'd never really thought about it like that, because I like to have this kind of open mind, think we can save everybody and we can make everyone's life better. And maybe we should keep that at the forefront of our thoughts. But with the acceptance that, maybe we can help a lot of people, but maybe not everybody.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, you always look back, the benefit of hindsight, and you kind of wish you'd done things differently. There's something I said to him a couple of days before he died. I had 2 kids at the time, and they were very, very young, and I wanted him. I said, you can't just go on the big rides at the Mop. We were at the Mop in Stratford, the fair. And I was kind of having a pop at him, saying, oh, just get the kids some sweets and then go on a ride later. And I'll always feel horrendously guilty about that, because I didn't see him again, So it's... and I think you want to be able to think that you could have done things differently. But
of course,
as the only other sibling, growing up with someone who had mental illness was extremely difficult. I felt obliged to kind of take him out with me on nights out when I just wanted to go out and have a few drinks with my mates. And, there was one time when I was at uni it was on my placement year when I lived in London, and he lived in Leamington. And he managed to get on a train and find me in the middle of the night, and at 4 o'clock in the morning was knocking on the door, and of course my housemates thought we were about to be burgled. Well, knocking on the door, clearly burglar doesn't do that, but they were, well, what the hell is it? And I was just like, that's my brother, this is me, this is what I have to live with. So I think mental, from a selfish point of view, mental health has such a knock-on effect to the people around you, and it certainly changed who I am as a person.
Yeah, of course, yeah. There was an average, it says, of a suicide can affect the average of 135 people, so that's family, children, friends, colleagues, neighbours. It's a network of people that it affects. But Paul, how did you come about getting involved with Working for Mind?
Well, I think probably first I would say it's the first time I've heard that Emily talk in that way, and I great admire of your bravery, and I can't imagine what that journey has been like for you, but
thank you.
I think in sharing those sorts of stories, it makes it hopefully does reach other people, and maybe will make them, or a bit like you said, Alex, I'm a bit of an optimist, although, reality, we can't save everybody. I think, if we want to stay level-headed in this world, we've got to put sort of our foots forward and at least go with the hope that we can save everybody. I think that's something that sustains us. So my journey, up until 2015, I had no contact with mental health services. I had quite a successful career. Financially, was doing quite well. But I was a bit of a workaholic. I immersed myself in my work really to deal with other issues. And so in 2015, I kind of reached breaking point. And to both of your points, really, I've been carrying this, what I now know to be called clinical depression, around for quite a few years, and it had just become overwhelming. It was kind of like a rock that I was carrying around above me, and I no longer had the resources to cope with that. So I planned to end my life. Typically when we do that, in my case, I experienced euphoria. By planning the ending of my life, I actually felt like I got a solution. And so, interestingly, 2 weeks before I made several attempts, people said, it's a bit like we had the old Paul back. You seem quite chipper and quite happy. We thought, you were fixed and you were back on the road to recovery. And of course, that isn't the case. We don't just wake up from something like depression overnight. The recovery journey tends to be over weeks and months. So made that plan, made 6 attempts, and luckily for me, I failed. Ended up homeless. Police officer found me, and luckily for me, I was sectioned, and I spent 6 months on a secure psychiatric ward in some form of recovery. And then luckily for me, my local mine, South Warwickshire and Worcestershire mine, picked me up, gave me some support, started volunteering for them, and that's where I kind of have ended up today. So that was my journey.
What do you think the underlying cause was for you to reach clinical depression?
So I think there isn't just one factor, one cause. Some of it will be about feeling like, in my case, feeling an outsider to society. The second case, my father had quite a strong work ethic about working very hard, and so I was doing that and neglecting any sort of social life. Didn't have any outside interests from work. Feelings of stress and overwhelm. It was an incredibly pressurized job, so those factors as well. So I think it's a mixture of factors, and then those led to very self-destructive behaviours, which exacerbated my poor mental health and well-being. And it was interesting what you said, Emily, about drugs. We know 40% of people who struggle with mental illness turn to addiction for some form of support, and so that was kind of part and parcel of my downfall ultimately, really.
So what was it that you turned to?
So in my case, a combination of drugs, cocaine, methamphetamine, stuff like that. And then some very destructive behaviours, financially destructive, reckless behaviour that led me to where I am today.
Do you feel, Paul, that this is the only thing you can do now after experience something like that? The only thing you can do is to be in this environment where you can relate to people perhaps going through something similar and therefore able to contribute something back to that?
Really good question. So I know through my volunteering that was something that helped my recovery. So the ability to help other people. In initial stages of my volunteering, I was taking calls from people who were struggling with suicidal ideation or in crisis with their mental health. And that, often when we volunteer or give to other people, that isn't a selfless act, right? It feeds our self-esteem and our, gives us a kind of boost. So I would say that's, it does give you that kind of energy. And I think it is something in which, certainly in the work that I do now, being able to tell my story, it's exhausting, right? Having to tell that and relay that. And I don't know if you relate to that, Emily, but having to explain to, it does, each time you do that, it does take a little bit of a chunk out of you. But quite often the reward you then get back from doing that, does fuel your mental health and well-being.
Yeah, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. I sit there and contemplate this. I think by doing what I do and learning about the topic of depression and suicide, and I'm helping guys that are sometimes struggling, am I holding myself back in that kind of, position, where I'm fixated and I'm interested, I'm learning more. I think there's acceptance that it is a part of life. The things that affect you the hardest and that cause you the most adversity is kind of what you're drawn to, at least in my experience anyway. It's the thing that I can understand more than anything. So I understand depression more than happiness, because I think I've probably spent more life struggling than I have happy, which is probably most people really, right? So I don't know how you feel about that, about whether it can sometimes hold you in that position when maybe there's a more compassionate thing we could do, or find other interests that aren't involved in the things that kind of killed us.
Well, because there's some good research that shows, isn't there, if you find something that you're interested in, that you're passionate about, and you can do that, then you'll never do a day's work in your life, right? Because you have this general curiosity about it. I think also, it's meaningful to the people around us, meaningful to our communities. I'm not doing a job that's just fueling profit for the capitalist society. It's got a return on it that I know helps other people in whatever small way. So I suppose so. I think one of the things I get frustrated about, I don't know whether this is your experience, Alex, but I know everything there is to know about, or not everything, but I know a hell of a lot about depression. I'm well educated about the stuff that can really help. I know, for example, that there's been some good study by Missouri University about this, the role of music in our lives. And if you can play an upbeat sort of playlist of music every day to yourself, how that can help ward off depression. Do I do that? No. I know all of these tools, and this is the interesting thing about our mental health and well-being. We can know all of this stuff. We know what keeps us well. We know all of the stuff. I know that nutrition and exercise is really good for our mental health and well-being. But I still can find myself, with that black dog following me around, and make choices that work against my mental health and well-being. So it's an interesting question. Sometimes it's a bit torturous, really.
Yeah, I understand. It's a great point as well. And I'm like, well, would that black dog be following us around if we did the things that we know are good for us? This is what I mean. Sometimes is it a choice? As hard as that is to face, like I'm the same with you. Music, if it's a Johnny Cash Hurt song, I'll put it on all night and sit and listen to that and really get down into that, because I fucking love it. I absolutely love it. It's great. He had his issues. He brought out his genius through it. So a lot of the geniuses that we respect, they're heavily flawed too. It's why we love them. I think it's why we relate. If you look at all the best people, the Tarantinos, the directors in films, the best musicians, they're very troubled people.
Yeah,
aren't they? And we love.
But if they weren't troubled, they probably wouldn't make as good music.
Sure. I mean, talk about favourite bands. Like you look at a Queen, you look at a Freddie Mercury.
Amy Winehouse,
Amy Winehouse, 27 when she died.
Yeah.
So was Kurt Cobain. So was Jimi Hendrix.
27.
The Curse of 27.
Yeah.
And these are all what we would call greats. Isn't that insane? They're greats, but they're highly troubled. They've probably got huge mental health issues, but we love them. We adore them.
I think the thing is as well is by... if we weren't talking about our mental health issues and using them to help other people, we'd still be feeling it. So, we talk about that black dog following you around. Well, actually, if you're at least using your experiences and channeling that into something, then that's got to be better than carrying that black dog around and keeping it to yourself. So I think... yes, it can be challenging, but I think we use our experience. Everyone uses their experience, whether that's a mental health issue or not, to, if they're smart, to use it in a way that is profitable or productive or helps them, earns them money. So I think... I don't really see it being a problem using our experiences to help other people. And I don't think it really holds us back, but I think we can move on with that. And I think, you're helping someone, but you might be helping someone with a slightly different issue, but so you can relate to it, your issues in different ways. And I don't think it always comes back to rehashing your exact personal experience the same way every time, but you use it to move on and learn from, and then try and help other people out of the similar situations. So ultimately, I haven't suffered. I mean, I have had my, own issues over the years, but nothing on obviously Ben's level. So I haven't suffered like that myself, but I've not found it a real drag having to sort of regurgitate it over the years. It just makes me more passionate about helping people.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think is more natural for us humans to experience happiness or depression? What's our more natural state? Paul's smiling. So I reckon I might know Paul's answer.
I feel like I'm going to give a politician's answer here, but for me, I think it just depends on the individual.
So our makeup, the way our brains wired, the way we were
then
brought up.
that's the whole nature-nurture debate. But I'm a natural worrier, for example. So my sort of depression or negative emotions, if you like, are sort of manifest in sort of anxiety, for example. So that's how I would say I've got a negative trait. But equally, what is happiness and what is depression? You know, happiness is just subjective. It could be being a really caring person. It could be having a great sense of humour, or it could just be being very calm. It's just too big a question to just pin on one person.
Sure.
I don't think it's.
But it's funny that's what most people chase.
There's a spectrum, isn't there? So,
sure, but it's interesting that's what people chase. This thing that we can't define, this happiness, is what people really want. It's what they crave, and yet it's difficult to define, and it's a fleeting feeling.
Yeah.
So it's a very risky game to chase happiness, because you find it in pleasure. Where do you get pleasure? Drugs create a lot of pleasure. So does alcohol. So does sex. So do all these things, right? So it's a fine line, isn't it, between like purpose. This is why I think, like, although we all do what we do, it's not easy, but there's purpose in it. It might not even bring us happiness. You know, we're talking about suicide. There's not much happiness in that, but there's a ton load of purpose in it, isn't there? That we can. If you think about a nurse's job as well, are you happy in your job? I don't know about that. Is it purposeful? Yes. So it's like, can you have both, or do you need to prioritise one over the other?
Well, is being successful and earning a lot of money, does that bring you happiness? Probably not. But I guess it depends on how motivated or what motivates you as a person.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so obviously, you know, being really successful and probably means working a lot of hours, which will take you away from the people that are supposed to be most important to you, who will make you happy. But then you wouldn't be able to go on the nice holidays and make those nice memories if you didn't earn the money that took you away from your kids in the first place. So.
For sure. I mean, what a game to play, right? Like you say, the people that we deem as successful do have to make huge sacrifices. And it's in the long run, do those sacrifices actually give you what you want? It's difficult. So humans naturally more drawn towards happiness or depression. So we always think that depression is not a normal state, but maybe it is.
So I'd probably come at this. I have a belief that we are designed to have more up days than down days. Whether I describe those up days as happiness or not, I think, you know, because there is some debate, isn't there, about the pursuit of happiness isn't necessarily what we should be looking at as human beings. It should be about our contribution to society, our ability to contribute to those who we love and care about around us. So I think in part of my work that one of the pieces of work I do for Mind is mental health first aid training, and we always have this piece about, you know, how we're designed. You know, if you look at your life over a month's period, you should be having more up days than down, but you should definitely be having down days, because how do you make a reference point for the up days? And, you know, how do we actually enjoy those moments if we've not been through adversity and challenge? And I think that's a common misperception with our children and young people. You know, they look on social media these days. The narrative is that you are meant to be constantly having this life which is just brilliant and ace. And we know that's unrealistic and untrue, but you know, they won't be experiencing that. And when they start to experience those down days, then it's kind of a bit like, well, I failed and therefore, you know, I'm not good at life. And so we have to push back against that narrative a bit.
So let's go with that for a minute then. So over the course of a month, let's just say we should aim for more up days than down days, right? That seems like a pretty cool goal. Do you think that requires effort and hard work, or do you think it should come naturally?
Well, life by its very nature is effort and hard work, isn't it? So I think we've got to be careful in our society. There's a kind of narrative that things will just come to us, you know, and perhaps it's not until our later years that we realise that actually things don't just come to us; they come to us by hard work, by effort, by focus. So I'm not sure I've answered your question, but I think everything that we do in life requires effort, and if we just go with, it goes back to when we were in caves, doesn't it? We had to go out and hunt for our food, otherwise we would die, and we had to protect ourselves from predators, and we had to find partners, we had to be part of a pack, part of a group. All of those things required effort. So I think it does require effort, yeah.
So the way I would look at this, there's a lower self and there's a higher self in me. There's a Alex that can show up and be pretty nice and good to society, but I also know and have experienced the lower self, and Alex that is neither of those things. It's way more natural if I don't do the right things to fall back to lower self Alex. So the gym, eating well, fresh air, reading, they're the things that promote me to be this person that can do this podcast, for example, what you might call a higher self.
I think with anything, like not just happiness, but if you want a good result out of anything in life, you have to put the effort in. Sometimes, unfortunately, like I wish I was skinny. If I was really skinny, I wouldn't bother doing any exercise. I know all the endorphins and all that, but actually, if I didn't have to go out for a run, or if I didn't have to go to the gym or watch what I eat and eat the nice things, I wouldn't bother, because if I looked great, then that's okay. But I can't, because I'll, I won't look the way I want unless I put the effort in. And that's the same with happiness. That's the same with having, a good family life, having to discipline kids so that they don't turn into utter morons when they grow up, and also in work professionally, that's why, if money was no object, I still wouldn't want a job that was monotonous and boring. I'd want something that was fulfilling, so because it's more than just the money, isn't it?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I mean, on the physical front, I'm the same, right? There's all the foods I love are the foods that are like pizza and all the things that are not promoting what I would call good health. But that's an external thing, so people will look at me and they will make a judgment, right? So I stay in good health. I think it's easier to get away with not doing the work on your mental health because you can hide that all externally, or you think you can get away with it. You can't, but you think you can. So
it's more difficult to put your finger on, isn't it? Ill mental health is not like a broken bone on an X-ray.
There's things we know about mental health. So we know that exercise is as good as medication now, right? So we know that. So you could argue and look around and go, well, why don't people do the things that they know are good for their mental health? If everybody exercised, would we already have a huge improvement in the horrific stats that we're seeing? So why don't we put emphasis on that?
So I just want to step back. I would challenge, actually, we talked about the higher Alex and the lower Alex, and that the lower doesn't require any effort. I think some people that we're very fortunate to be able to support people. It's a position of privilege at mine, but some of the people that we support, a lot of energy goes into keeping them where they are. So they might get a diagnosis from their doctor that says depression, anxiety, that label becomes them, and then that still requires effort for them to stay at that level, either through anger or through sadness, or there is effort required to keep themselves at that point. So, for example, if I'm in one of my very dark phases, that still requires effort from me to keep me in that space. It still requires me to, shall I eat healthy or shall I not eat healthy? Shall I not exercise? Shall I exercise?
It's another stress for you to think about. And then if you don't do it, you've let yourself down, and then you get even worse.
Sure.
And you can wallow in that guilt.
I totally disagree that definitely wouldn't require more effort to be that. So to eat poorly is much easier than to eat healthy.
Well, in today's society,
Sure.
you go to Aldi, what's cheaper, fresh fruit and veg
You
or
can
processed foods?
Sure, you get it right. Like it's society makes it much easier
Yeah.
to not eat a healthy diet
Absolutely.
for sure.
Yeah.
So I think yes, both might require effort, but I know which one requires more effort from my standpoint. To be my best self, I have to work continuously every single day. In fact, it was Jeff that taught me this. He was like, every day you've got to wake up and you've got to win your will every single day. It's tough. It's hard. And it's not nice to say that. Like, I've got to work really hard just to keep sane. From my experience, it's kind of been like that. It's been a challenge just to fit in.
But that, I don't know, that's a choice though for some people that we support, particularly with things like psychosis, schizophrenia, personality disorder, bipolar. That isn't a choice that's within their gift.
Yeah.
Their brains are making decisions for them that prevent them from lifting themselves up out of that, and it's not a choice that they can make without the support of medication. And unfortunately, when we look at psychiatric medication, we haven't changed the medication we dish out since the 1950s. People are being held in those states by poor medication, poor treatments, lack of innovation, lack of investment.
Yeah, which is terribly sad to hear, because it almost sounds like a curse. You might have been born with your brain in a certain makeup. You've played the lottery to who your parents are and where you're born. And we're almost ruling out any form of free will then, which is quite scary, isn't it? Because within hope, for me anyway, it's the decision to make things better. If we are labelled and you say, well, that's who I am, that's my makeup, then you almost, by definition, remove hope, which is so it's... Hopefully all the great work you guys are doing are proving that people, even at their lowest points, can make things better. I think at least that's got to be one part to make things better. Things might never be perfect. You might never be who you really want to be, but you can make things better for you and for the people around you, right?
Well, you can, but it also requires society, our politicians, to start to invest in this stuff, right? So, for example, there's been a good study by the University of Manchester this week that came out that has studied the effects of black mushrooms, and I can't remember the name of the ingredient, but there's an ingredient in black mushrooms that when offered to people with psychotic disorders like schizophrenia, like bipolar disorder, microdoses of what are commonly known as magic mushrooms can have an incredible effect on their symptoms and can be really restorative, but we're just not funding that level of research. So that takes away, to your point, the individual's choice or the individual's ability to recover, because if society isn't supporting them with the best pharmaceuticals, the best talking therapies and things like that, then that's outside of their gift.
Couldn't
agree more on that one. Yeah, I mean,
that's in the news today, wasn't it?
I don't know.
Talking about you're talking about politicians, that it's in the news today that police are no longer going to attend mental health 999 calls.
Really scary stuff, and the Met are actually going to start doing that from September of this year.
So can you just confirm that? So they're going to stop attending emergency 999 calls to people who are in mental health distress?
Yeah.
Unless there's an immediate threat to life.
Right, okay.
Yeah. Is that right?
And they're withdrawing away from that. There is an argument, of course, why were the police in that space anyway? Why were they doing those welfare checks? I mean, I was very fortunate here in Warwickshire. The police officer who found me, he was very empathetic. He knew what to do with me. He hadn't had any formal training for mental health first aid or anything like that. If you take those people away, what are you replacing that support with? And, we would love to see out there in our communities psychiatric nurses or, some sort of emergency psychiatric support for people. Just like when you phone for a paramedic, you phone for a CPN and they arrive on your doorstep within, however many minutes. We would hope for that. but we're leaving a huge gap there of support for people who could be and deserve to be supported and rescued in moments of absolute crisis.
So who picks up the fall now? Do you think there's going to be more demand on charities like Calm and Mind, or do you think now the responsibility is going to fall on the individual?
Well, Mind, Calm, Samaritans, Papyrus, all of these really great charities are going to have to pick that up, because that, we can't leave people without that support. But there is no funding for this. We've got really brilliant people working in our NHS in mental health services, but they're so stretched that they just cannot meet demand and need. We've been saying for a long time 1 in 4 people struggle with their mental health each year. I think our view is that's closer to 1 in 3 now. There was a shocking report yesterday out that said every 2 days we lose a young female aged 16 to 24 to suicide. That is an absolute outrage in this country. We have to be providing support for these people, but our mental health services, are incredibly underinvested in, has been the story for the last 11 years.
And sadly, honestly, I think the country needs to brace itself, because with the cost of living crisis, interest rates going through the roof. I mean, on a personal level, we can see, like, firsthand. With most families in the UK will be worried and very concerned about what their financial position is going to look like over the next 12 months. And we're all kind of looking at when our mortgage mortgage deals expire, and when we're going to have to pay another couple of £100 whilst increasing, energy bills. So, and that is going to have a serious knock-on effect to the people that need to use our service.
Yeah, absolutely. Apparently you're 10 times more likely to take your own life if you're under severe financial pressure, which was something. I mean, here's a list of causes: relationship breakdowns, lack of close friends, loneliness, unable to open up, deprivation, personal traits, masculinity was on that list, changes in midlife, emotional illiteracy. So there's a lot of different factors. And whether this is a compound, if you've got financial stress and you're going through a relationship breakdown and you're unable to open up, is it, are we looking at, you need 3 of these or more, and you are at a high risk of being somebody who might take their own life? It doesn't quite answer the question of why more men do it than women, because women go through the same pressures, right? Financial stress, relationship breakdowns. That's an interesting kind of like differentiator to me.
So it is right, 70% male, 30% female in terms of suicide rate. That we're not good at monitoring other genders, and but I think on that list, any one of those factors could cause one of us to feel overwhelmed, and then feel like we have to take some drastic action, like thinking about suicide or suicide ideation. The biggest one on that list, I think, that Mind is worried about is loneliness and isolation. Yeah. There's this guy, a brilliant guy called Gabor Mate, who does some great work on stuff.
Superb, isn't he? Yeah.
And he said, actually, ironically, compared to previous generations, we're more connected technologically than we've ever been before as a society, but we're actually more isolated. I mean, shockingly, Office for National Statistics says 25% of people in the UK feel socially isolated, and it's no good for us. It's really bad for our mental health and well-being. We need to have people around us that we feel like we belong to, that we care about, that we love about. If we don't have those relationships, we can't share our challenges with other people. And so if we are, for example, struggling with our finances, the ability to talk to somebody else about that and share those challenges, really powerful and really good for us. And if we're socially isolated and trying to keep all of that stuff in our head, it becomes a bit of a pressure cooker.
I'm worried about it. Like, you can see that, I I don't think I'm speaking out of turn when I say, like, men just don't talk about their problems like women do. I think that's pretty true on the whole. But in addition to that, young people probably don't either. Like my kids, they will, instead of actually picking up the phone and calling someone, least of all me, when I need to speak to them, you know, I don't know why we pay their mobile phone bills, because it's not to speak to me. But instead of actually speaking to someone on the phone, they will record a Snapchat and send it, and then that person will then send their response on Snapchat back. And I was like, oh my gosh, why don't you just pick up the phone? That's what it's there for, you know. And so they're having a conversation, but it's not in real time, and it's, you know, and you think, well, what is that going to look like in 10 years' time in a commercial setting when you're trying to hold down a job? I can certainly see the younger generation increasingly unwilling to pick up the phone and speak to someone. They want to send it on an email, or, well, not my kids, but, you know, they want to write it down. They don't want to verbalise it in a conversation. And I think, so what does that mean for my two sons who are male, younger generation? What's the effect on their mental health going to be in sort of 10, 15 years' time? It's quite worrying.
So apparently 40% of men who are struggling have never spoken to anyone. The main reasons are, they say they've learned to deal with it. They don't want to be a burden. They're too embarrassed, and they still feel that there's a negative stigma around mental health. And I'm sure there's more complex reasons too. I think the ability to know what you're feeling, for me, I would add to that list, and then to express what you're feeling. So feeling and expressing what you're feeling are two different skills.
I think the biggest part of all of that is this stigma. You know, we hear from teenage males. YouGov did a survey in December last year, and it showed that teenage males in particular would not, if they were struggling with their mental health, would not reach out for support because of the appearance of it making them feel weak. You know, the phrases like man up, grow a pair, all of those things got in the way of them reaching out for support. And conversely, we know at Mind only too well, the research is compelling that if anybody starts to struggle with their mental health and well-being, the earliest they reach out for support, the quicker we can fix them and move them on with their way. If that's probably not the right phrase, fix them, but we can support them towards recovery. The longer they leave it to fester, the more complex it becomes to treat. I do think one of the things that we've learnt about Mind, we used to call males hard to reach. And we used to say that, you know, men are really difficult they won't talk about their emotions, but actually the research is starting to push back on that. If you do give males a space that's confidential, where they feel safe and secure, where they feel unjudged, and you put that in the right setting that's accessible for them, they will start to open up. So it's a case of us starting then to turn around and think, well, how do we provide that support? How do we give males those opportunities to open up in that very safe and confidential space? And how do we communicate with them? You know, when you start to talk to males about mental illness and depression and stuff like that, they turn off. But if you start to talk in terms of feeling down, I'm feeling overwhelmed at the moment, I'm feeling under pressure, I can't cope. If you use that sort of language, that masculine sort of language, you tend to start to open more doors with them and make stuff a bit more accessible.
Do you know what the hardest part of that battle is, though? Getting them to turn up. We know this. So we have groups of guys come here. When they're in the room, they're phenomenal. You wouldn't believe what comes out of their mouths after, you know, once they know it's safe and they can speak and they're not going to get attacked, they're off. As we know through the groups that we spoke about, right? You know, there is support for the guys. It's getting them there. That's the most challenging step.
I think one thing I want to do from a marketing perspective is to, you know, make it seem normal. They're not the only ones. It's like someone else has that same story, and that's the job for me to do, to try and, you know, speak to the guys that we're already dealing with and our practitioners on the front line more, and get that message from them and then put it out there in a through a channel that they're going to receive, and in a way that is relatable to them. So that's definitely one of my goals in the next kind of 3 to 6 months.
How do you think we can encourage more men to show up at these things that could be quite transformational? What's in the message? Like how do we accept they have to hit crisis first?
I don't think we can. I think, and increasingly you see that in society where we're saying people need to reach rock bottom before we provide them with support. It's much cheaper.
Well, not provide them with support.
Well,
no. But for them to reach out. So you had to reach your rock bottom.
Yeah.
I had to reach mine. So for us to say that men aren't going to do that.
So the narrative has to change where we're saying and we're demonstrating and providing a society that says stepping forward for support is a position of strength, not weakness. It signals strength. The research is very clear, isn't it? That the most successful sports people, the most successful politicians, the most successful community leaders, individually, when you look at what makes them successful, one of the key components is that when they get stuck with stuff, when they need help, they shout for it and they yell for it and they're assertive about getting it. And I think we need to change that narrative that says, particularly in the male space, that says actually, part of masculinity is stepping forward and yelling out for help at the earliest opportunity. So somehow we need to change that narrative in our society.
Do you think there's maybe an argument to say if you step forward, you need to do that? If you're not going to do it for yourself, do it for your loved ones, because you owe it to them to step forward and make yourself better?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting one, isn't it? So I think about what would have happened if things hadn't have turned out the way they did for me, and what would the legacy that I would have left behind. And that weighs heavily on me now, and that is kind of one of the factors that keeps me really safe. I know now, but then having said that, I'm well now. It was my unwell state that said actually everybody would be better off without Paul.
But maybe if someone had got through to you before you reached rock bottom, you might have been more open, to taking that help and moving forward. Yeah,
it's a good. It's a good point. And with a lot of this stuff, we're left with speculation, aren't we? What if? What might have happened? And it kind of goes against your narrative that some people can't be rescued. So yeah, it's a difficult one.
I just know transformation usually starts from pain, and a lot of it. Because, like you say, change is difficult, right? We talked into tapping into that. It requires a lot of effort. Usually you need something. People are driven. We're all motivated to stay out of a certain amount of pain. That's what keeps us going. And it's usually that point that people go, I can't continue like this. That's what a crisis line is. I'm at the end. I don't know what to do. This is why they save lives, right? Because it's like the last point of call. What's the next step from crisis call? It's probably suicide, right? So it's like that's where people usually have to go. And I don't know whether the narrative will change human nature or not. And if you do want to change narrative, wow, how do you do that? Especially a narrative that we might not be in control of.
Well, that has to start with education. Why are we spending all this time educating our children and young people in academia when we're not educating them how to look after their physical? Well, we do a certain amount of physical health, but how to look after and nurture their mental health and well-being. It's great that some primary schools are delivering mindfulness now and all of that stuff, but actually we're not teaching our children and young people how to nourish and nurture their mental health and well-being. We don't teach them any of that stuff. I didn't know until 2015, 16 that actually I could push back against my mental health and well-being, and I could make that strong. So I think education is a huge part of that, and we're just not delivering that for our children and young people.
Yeah, I don't think we can separate physical and mental health, by the way.
Yep, they coexist, and I mean, diagnostically you can separate them, but you can't have one without the other,
Sure,
right?
yeah. It just seems like especially for a lot of men, it's the easiest place to start. Like, let's get you in good shape. It's quite appealing, lifting weights, doing exercise, playing sports. For me, men bond after a certain amount of time together and struggle and adversity. So if you look at I don't know, footballers, you know, when they score a goal and they're hugging each other, they even kiss each other on the lips, slap each other on the arse. They would not do that off the pitch. You know, they're a team. They go through they overcome a battle. And I find even when we go and climb mountains with the guys, it's like before everyone's a bit sheepish and stuff, and then they go through the suffering together. Their legs burn, their hearts ticking. They get up, they conquer the mountain, they come back down. Handshakes, hugs, open up. It's like we've been through something together. We've experienced something together, and that's the thing that bonds us. And I think that's another obstacle we've got. It's just like putting men in a room. Sometimes there needs to be a couple of steps to get them there. They have to do something together. They have to bond in a different way before they vocally start to bond.
And in your experience after that kind of, you talked about the mountain exercise.
Yeah.
Do those connections remain?
Yeah.
Afterwards?
Yeah. We've had strong connections for about 3 years now with the Better Man.
Great.
Yeah, it's almost like I don't want to lose this safe space because I know how rare it is. So I know the power. If you get the guys to a mind meet up, a safe environment, they will come back and back and back because it's so helpful. It's so transformative. For me, the obstacle has always been, even as somebody who runs a business, to get sales across the line, i.e., I want to help you, mate. Please come to this group. I can't really vocalize how transformational it is. They have to experience it. But to experience it, you have to get them in the room.
Yeah.
It's the hardest part, right? And even, like, I'm well educated on this. I still find it very difficult to reach out for help to that point where you said you have to reach out, the earlier the better. I just don't do that. And I know I should. But I will wait and fight until I have to reach out. It's just what I do. I don't know whether it's human nature, whether you can change that, and whether we just make sure that when you do reach that point, there are areas that you can go to.
Yeah, I mean, like the group, the wellbeing group we do for men is something it's only just started, so
Sure.
it needs time to sort of gain momentum as well. But I know after speaking to the practitioner that runs the group, that one of the guys came along but not because he saw the poster, it's because his wife did and thought he would benefit from it. So sometimes, you know, we've got to think, well, in order to get through to some of these guys, we need to assume that we're going to get gatekeepers help, you know. So actually it might be a good idea to, maybe the guys aren't going to be in Starbucks, for example, but maybe their wives or partners or even children or parents might be, so they can then persuade them. And that's just basically about us getting that word out there about support is available and it's local and it's really, really easy, it's free to access, and it's open to anyone.
Tricky conversation though, isn't it? I want you to go to this meeting.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
It's
like saying I want you to get a personal trainer. Do you know what I mean? It's a difficult thing to bring up. I haven't got the answer to this. The people in the middle who are like flirting with depression and flirting with a miserable life. It's like, how do you get them before they get there? I don't know. And I've had some of the best psychologists on, and they're like, we're stuck as well, Alex. We don't know. People who come to see us need our help. They don't.
The bottom line is, if people want, if people's mental health is to improve, at some point they have to make a step themselves. And I just see our job as being that facilitator to make them make that step as easy as possible. And then once we have them, we can then guide them to better mental health in the right way for them, whether that's accessing one of our groups, taking on one-to-one support, or other services that would help them outside of South Warwickshire and Worcestershire Mind. Then we are that facilitator for them. But at some point, that individual has to make some kind of step towards you on their own, really.
For sure. You guys are in the trenches every day. Like, how do you remain optimistic in what could be? We could turn this into a cynical conversation. No worries, pretty easily, because it's a pretty difficult topic. Like, how do you remain optimistic, and how do you keep fighting when you see the powers above, perhaps like on the political front, on the societal front, aren't kind of like helping the cause? Like, how do you remain upbeat?
I do think that anger, you can channel your anger into those positive outcomes. I think also we are lucky to be able to see people, you know, I don't see them on a daily basis, but certainly on a weekly or monthly basis, who have turned the corner, and you just look at them and you just know, well, okay, you know, that's one person and that's just enough, right? You might have, you know, particularly if we're handling calls of people who are in crisis, sometimes you just don't know the outcome. But if you've just helped one person in 1 year, that's enough. That's one more than anybody else has managed to get to, and that's enough. So I think you do have to be able to have that optimism. Sure. Otherwise you would get, you know, it would keep you in a very unhelpful place for sure.
Yeah, well, I reeled out the stat that a suicide affects 135 people. So if you save somebody's life, right, it's positively impacted 135 people potentially, right?
Yeah.
What's
Very
the
true.
number one thing that you do for your mental health, Emily? What's the number one thing that or the number one thing that you've done that has been good for your mental health?
Well, listen, we're an hour in, so anyone who knows me listening to this will be surprised it's taken me this long to
Is this
mention.
the marathon story? I haven't known you long.
I know.
And it's the marathon.
Like, that was extremely fulfilling. I never want to do it again. I hate running now. I'm worse fitness running wise than I was sort of 4 months before the marathon. I don't know why, but anyway, that's another story. But it's been something I wanted to tick off my bucket list for a long time, and it has been extremely fulfilling personally just to, you know, complete it, because it was a real slog. But also, like, I actually believe that I actually ran the marathon, and I got a ballot place, but I raised money for two charities, National Mind and a small charity in Liverpool called Sean's Place. And that was set up by his sister, Debbie Rogers, who had lost her brother, Sean, he took his own life about 4 years ago, I think. Anyway, I was raising money, and then I saw the job advertised for South Warwickshire and Worcestershire Mind, and I put this in my application because obviously I shared my story on social media, so I really passionately believe that it helped me get this job. So that's obviously one reason why it was really fulfilling. And to put that message out there to people about my story and my brother's story, and particularly raising money for a smaller charity like Sean's Place, was also really humbling, because I had so many people, strangers, sponsor me, and they had similar stories to me, and I'm kind of quite emotionally stable. But every time I got a sponsorship and a little message on Just Giving, oh my gosh, the waterworks were like that. And it was just so amazing to have those people share their stories with me. And like we talked earlier about how volunteering is actually a bit selfish, because it makes you feel really, really good about yourself. And that's how it made me feel. It was so, so rewarding. Obviously, you know, it's a big physical kind of achievement, and, you know, so it helped my physical fitness as well, and it meant I could eat what I wanted for 4 months, which was also really good. But yeah, so, you know, I'd say probably that's my biggest one achievement for my mental health and also physical health. But I mean, generally speaking, I try and I suppose strike a good healthy balance between, you know, staying healthy physically with exercise and decent diet, with, you know, enjoying myself. So like to go, you know, on nice holidays with the family, you know, go out and have a few drinks and stuff, meet friends, have a laugh, enjoy time with kids. So I think it's about striking that balance. Okay. And I think that's something you just continually improve as you go through your life, don't you, really? You kind of realise... I just remember when I had my first child, I was hell-bent on reading all the textbooks, and it was the worst thing I could have done, because I was a slave to those textbooks, and it didn't work because Grace was just... it's a wonder I had any more children, basically, because she was just hard work, and I'd have been better off just relaxing, taking each day as it came. But I was just a slave because once you've read that self-help book, you can't unread it, can you? You know. And I was so cross that I did it, because by the time I got to my third child, I was just like, whatever, you know. And it was brilliant, you know. I just slept, well, didn't really sleep during the day because I had 2 more by then. But, you know, you just learn to get that balance right. And I think that's something I've definitely got better as I've got older at.
Cool. Paul, what about you? What's the best thing you've done for your mental health?
I think being able to connect with other people. So I get a huge amount from sharing my story because it makes me vulnerable. And when you connect with people, when you show your own vulnerability, people tend to buy into you then. So certainly in the training that I deliver and the workshops that I do for Mind, you know, I always get brilliant feedback from that and a connection with other people that I wouldn't enjoy ordinarily. And then the other thing I'm very privileged to do is to go to other local mines, and I do some quality auditing for them and hear from their clients and service users about the great job that organisation does. That always makes me feel quite chipper.
Yeah, I think what that shows me as well, it's important to have some purpose in your life. It's important to have something. So the marathon's a great example too of just the ultimate purpose. It's so simple in theory. You have to run 24 miles. You have to get from here to
26.2.
Another PT. 26.2. Trust me, I wouldn't do that at 2.2 miles. But see how clear that is. It's difficult to do, but it's simple in theory. I love missions like that. It's like the mountain. All you've got to do, this is what I say to the guys. I'm like, you might not know where you're at in life right now, but today, all you've got to do is get to the top of that mountain and get back down. And it kind of like takes away a lot of the other, maybe unnecessary pressures sometimes. I think we can think our way into more trouble. It's been one of my issues for sure. Thinking my way into a depressed state, not being able to get control of those thoughts. When you've got a purpose and you're doing things, often those thoughts can evaporate. It's really, really healthy. So when you're doing your mental health first aid training, you're probably not worrying about all the shit that you've got going on outside that room, right? You're in flow. You're doing something good. You're running. You're hitting the miles. You're climbing the mountains. You're delivering the talk. I think it's important for everyone to have something outside of, you know, their family and friends that's an ultimate purpose for them.
On the flip side, however, if I was playing devil's advocate, I would say I was so excited about the marathon being over and that I could just go for a run with no expectation, no like length, time, distance, gradient to hit. And you could just go on and just do a really lovely trail run. And it didn't matter about looking at the clock or ticking it off on a chart.
Yeah, sure, it's nice, but is it good for us?
Well, it felt much better.
Of course, because it's comfortable, right? But this is what I'm saying. Humans are driven towards comfort. So if I say, when are you at your best? I'm at my best when I'm under pressure. I just am. When it's a healthy pressure.
But like, you couldn't cope with that pressure all the time, which is what I was saying about how striking the balance is really, really important.
But when did you do the marathon?
End of April.
Yeah, so the way that we would strategize this is you do something, you have a little break, but you sign up for something straight away.
I never wanted to run a marathon again. Did I say that?
But then you do something else. But this is where like knowing yourself is important, isn't it? So if you look back and go, when was I at my best? And often it's times of discomfort. This is what I mean about human nature is so strange. We think we want comfort. I fall into this trap all the time. I really want an easy, comfortable life. When I get it, I'm bored and I'm depressed. When I've got a challenge or a pressure, not something that's too ahead of me, otherwise that's overwhelmed, but something that I just can't quite do now, but I could do in 3 months if I worked for it. I think that's so, so important. And it fixates our mental health on something too, something positive. It's like, what can I do next? Because we all want to feel useful and like we're doing something. There's nothing worse to sit there and feel like you don't know what the fuck you're doing with your life, or like you're not contributing anything. It's a horrible feeling. It's a difficult one to get out of as well.
I think you have to also strike the balance between, for example, exercise and having some kind of challenge physically with what's going on in the rest of your life, you know. So, for example, you're not going to do a big physical challenge when you've got a really busy period at work, or you've got, I don't know, just other challenges you can't face. So in order for that not that challenge then to not become detrimental, you have to make sure that you can balance it with everything else, which again comes down to striking the right balance.
It's interesting how people remove physical before anything else, though. So when we say, it's one of the biggest kind of reasons I hear, it's like, I haven't got time because I'm working so hard. But we know for our mental health, exercise is probably going to give us more than working your ass off in front of a laptop. So it's strange what we compromise on. I compromise on the gym, but I'm still going to put that 10-hour shift in on the laptop. Isn't it interesting what we compromise on?
Yeah, and I think generally we compromise on self-care. So as human beings, we're always generally prioritizing other people, other things ahead of our own well-being. It's interesting what you were saying about sense of purpose and doing things. So when we started to go into the pandemic, after about 2-3 months into the pandemic, we're getting lots of people referring themselves to Mind who had been furloughed. And they said, well, when I was initially furloughed, I had to deal with the financial pain, but then I was going to go and paint the shed, or I was going to go and exercise, or I was going to go and read the books, or do all of this stuff I wanted to do. But actually what I ended up doing was just lolling out on Netflix and stuff like that. And all of a sudden I feel really down and depressed because I've got no sense of purpose to my life. I think as human beings, we absolutely need a sense of purpose. We need something by which to build our lives around, and a sense of focus so that we can achieve.
Yeah, and again, purpose is quite a difficult thing. I don't think you stumble upon it. I think you have to, again, we've come back to that hard work thing. You sometimes have to work hard. Like, you almost have to step across a line and sign up for the marathon. Like, that's a fair play to do that. Like, that's already an impressive feat, isn't it? But that was uncomfortable to sign. Do you know what I mean? It's the thing that gives you purpose isn't necessarily the most comfortable or natural route.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? This is where it's very tricky. So to improve your mental health might cause you some mental discomfort at first. And when you know this, you can kind of understand it and go, yeah, it's a bit scary, isn't it? But I want to be someone who's got a bit more courage in my life, and I want my will to open up, not shut down. And you have to,
train your brain. One of the things Paul delivers training on is mental resilience, emotional resilience. And I think, it's almost like you have to practice it. So you have to push yourself out of that comfort zone, give yourself those examples where you're going to be in that situation to improve the way you deal with that situation.
Yeah, there's no other way.
But you have to feel like you're armed with the tools to cope with that. So it's a bit of a sort of chicken and egg thing in a way, isn't it, I guess? But
you wouldn't, like, if somebody was sat on their couch now listening to this saying Emily ran a marathon, that's incredible, but I couldn't do that. You would start with, well, let's go like 100 meters. Like, there's the resilience training today, isn't it? It's like the gym theory. The great thing about, like, when you get yourself into shape, there's a blueprint of how you do things with your mental health too. Like, you wouldn't, if I was training someone new, I wouldn't make them squat 100 kilos if they couldn't squat 20. It'd just be ridiculous, right? Mm-hmm. I think we can fall victim to that with our discipline, willpower, mental health. We like to think we're over here, but really we're not. So we just need to start where we're at and make sure what we're asking to do is doable but challenging.
Yeah.
And you have to know yourself to set those targets. That's the thing. A lot of guys, especially more than women, overestimate their willpower and discipline.
I don't know. I so talking about the marathon, I see a million reasons why. I understand that start small. It's getting from it's that initial step I see as the biggest hurdle. I think that's the biggest. There are a million reasons why I couldn't possibly run a marathon.
But you probably you could do, for example, hypothetically speaking, this is like do couch to 5k and forget even marathon
got
at
the
all,
app,
full step.
got it all on my phone, but there's still a million reasons why. I've got so far, with the tracksuit, I've got it downloaded on my watch, I've got the earphones in.
Yeah, here's the thing though, Paul, I could find a million reasons for you to do it as well.
Yeah, sure you could.
And one of them is teaching resilience.
Yeah, sure. But the point is, it's that first step that a lot of us really struggle with.
Yeah, but that's where the resilience comes in.
Sure.
But also the desire to want to do it in the first place, isn't it? You can
but who wants to run a marathon?
But maybe
you only did it because it was a greater cause. Yeah, but there was a good reason to do it. Like, your suffering helped others. That's what makes us feel alive. Like,
I just want to put it out there as a disclaimer that I'm not furthering this discussion about the marathon here, guys. It's you guys.
Listen, I've done some
We
stupid.
should move on.
I've done
I've
done some stupid challenges that you sit there and go, why am I doing this? You know, but like it's quite
But then
nice.
maybe like for example, one type of sport or fitness isn't your bag, so you don't ever have to do that at all. But you could do something different, and it's trying to find what that thing is. I'd much prefer to climb mountains. Like you know, I'm actually quite keen to do the 3 Peaks challenge thing, but maybe over a weekend so I can sleep.
No, do it.
But
Was
like,
tough. That's tough.
Yeah, but I'd you know, I'd really quite like to do that, and that would appeal. Like, I love walking the dogs. I'd much prefer to do that than ever run again, you know, because it's so much more for me. I actually feel better after that because I can listen to a podcast or listen to music and watch one of the dogs swim or, you know, things like that. And it's just really enjoyable during the exercise, as well as, like, you know, the endorphins you get afterwards and all the actual physical benefits. But equally, I know it's not getting my heart rate going. So I'm kind of like, you know, that's why I feel like I still need to do something else. But you know, there's other things that people can do, and I think it's trying to find what that is.
I think the reality on resilience is there has to be some form of hardship if you want to become more resilient. You don't become resilient by having a bubble bath.
Well, that's a question.
Unless it's a cold one.
I've heard about your cold showers. I think you're mad. Oh gosh,
Really
that's
good
my
for your
worst
mental health,
nightmare.
cold showers.
Honestly, I
Really
stopped doing
good.
them, Paul, for a couple of weeks because I went to my sister. You know when you catch yourself not feeling good and you're like, okay, well, what am I doing differently? Yeah, cold showers, all these basic things that I didn't think were that essential. I hate the cold showers. Every day I put that cold shower on and I'm like, oh, God, this sucks.
Do you do it in the middle of winter?
All the time, every day.
Oh gosh.
Yeah,
But it's
and
your
there is
stress
that,
hormones, isn't it? It
there's a
triggers
physiological
and-
benefit, but for me, you know, I'm a bit of a meathead, so I'm like, okay, Alex, you can hear that voice saying, don't do it. It's cold. It's uncomfortable. There's so many things in your life that voice tells you not to do too. Well, let's get a victory over this voice and let's prove that you can push yourself to do something that's good for you. So I use that as a, get up every day and do something that's difficult thing that keeps my head good and strong. When I've had no discipline, Paul, in my life, that's when my life has fallen to bits. When I had that breakdown, for example, my discipline was just non-existent. When I have discipline, and it's a hard sell, like, dude, you need to become, because it sounds like it's a punishment, it sounds like it's restrictive. I'm like, it's the thing you need.
Do you think, though, that's a personality trait rather than
No, it's a skill. No, who comes out their mother's womb disciplined, up at 5 a.m. running the street? Nobody. It's a story that we like to tell ourselves because then we can say it's a personality trait. I could make you more disciplined in a year. Guaranteed. It's not a personality trait, that's for sure.
I don't know whether it's that black and white. I think there's, you know, you can be born more with the potential.
But it's a wrong
to be
question.
More or less
can you become more disciplined?
You certainly can.
Yeah,
you can
that's
train
all
yourself.
you need to focus on then.
But I certainly think there's part of your DNA that is prescribed into you being a certain way or not.
I'd say we might have been taught how to work hard, but yeah, so there might be an upbringing that means this guy works really hard, this guy doesn't. But again, I still think it's the wrong question. It's like the individual, can you become more disciplined in 12 months? The answer is always yes.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. And the great thing is, the less discipline you have, the more you can gain. If you're already a disciplined man and you go after more discipline, you've got small gains to make. If you're at the bottom of the pile, I'm like, honestly, in 12 months, you could transform your entire life with some basic discipline. Discipline's a great thing. It means the ability basically to do what you say you're going to do. I mean, if we're going to talk about mental health, would you rather be the guy that lives inside himself who trusts his own word, or the guy who says, I've said this 100 times, I know I'm not going to do it? This is the thing that with mental health, it's not talked about enough, about base qualities like discipline. That for me is like a direct link to mental health. And I'm not talking chronic mental illness, you know, where people can't get out of bed. I'm talking about, you know, the guy who's miserable and could potentially be somebody who goes down that dark path. I'm like, discipline is the thing that could save you.
But the problem with that is you're up against that person feeling comfortable in the space that they're in right now. And they might not feel happy. that they're in that space, but they feel comfortable with it. They're secure in that space.
Of course, it's predictable, right? It's predictable, but it's the same as getting the guys in the room to talk. That's a difficult thing to do. There's another good example of, dude, you're going to have to go through some real discomfort here to make your life better.
It is, and I think that's the point. It's about it. It's the difference between getting someone out of their comfort zone and doing something different versus what they've always done before or what their regular routine is.
Yeah, I mean, we're all switched on. How hard is it to get out of your comfort zone? It's so bloody hard, isn't it?
I think it depends what it is. So, if it's going in front of 600 people and talking about my mental health and well-being, yeah, I feel discomfort about that, but I can do that all day long.
Why?
Because it's a challenge. It's like I can make you sit there and listen to me.
Yeah, but I'm guessing you've worked your way to be somebody who's that, because if you think about what most people's worst nightmare is, standing up in front of 600 people. For you, you're like, bring it on. Yeah. This is when I'm at my best.
See, we would both find that a challenge, but I would find that massively more challenging.
I can tell Paul would thrive in that environment, right?
Yes, yeah,
like,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but that's interesting to me. Like,
but
what
if
people
you were
fear
to
most.
say you need to go to this gym here and exercise for an hour, that was like
cold sweat.
Yeah, but I get that, because I'm like, well, yeah, of course, Paul, you've practiced the art of speaking in front of people. Of course, you're good at it. People just don't put in the repetition of what they want to get better at. So if you go gym every day for a year, are you going to be more confident? Are you going to be more? Yeah, of course, you've practiced something. So the idea of me standing up in front of 600 people, I'm like, oh Jesus, this is going to be hell. For you, it's fun. It's what your challenge is.
It's the ability for us to be able, as a charity, to be able to help people to improve themselves and make them feel better. We never must lose sight of the fact we have to put themselves in their shoes and try and really understand what they're feeling, because the more and more experience you get in doing anything, it's often much more difficult to then put yourself in those people's situation, and when you can't do that, it's much harder to help them.
Yeah,
you know. I
think we're talking about empathy and compassion, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I absolutely agree. Interesting. Al Dovey last week, psychotherapist, said empathy is great, but there is an extension where you can go too far on empathy, and you can help people remain stuck. So you can be too empathetic, you can be too compassionate, meaning that you just keep them where they're at. I mean, what a difficult thing it is for you guys in your job to know when the right time to someone to say is, look, you've got to get moving now. You know, you can't stay in this position. It's actually more dangerous for you to stay when you're at than move. And that was a big component on moving before you make any analytical decisions. He was probably the first guy that brought that to my attention too. It's a complex subject. There's so many different parts to it. It's why I don't envy you guys who are in the position. Like, it's such a difficult. There is no right and wrong here, I don't think, or there is no one way of doing it. If there was, we could probably follow that blueprint and do it right. But I guess every person you speak to on their phone is their own individual, has their own shit going on. It's very complex. They've had their own story. They've got their own mindset. So it's having the skill there.
Yeah, and it's about giving them information, empowering them with choice so that they can move forward and start to fuel their own recovery. I think we get that wrong sometimes. I shiver a little bit. Shiver a little bit with psychologists and psychiatrists because, you know, the one thing we know particularly about recovery is that people need to have ownership of it. They need to feel like they're in control of it and not take that power away from them. I take the point about pushing people along, but we want people to get on and lift themselves up, really.
It's about literally one of our services is called supported self-help. So it's help, like exactly what you said, Paul, helping people to help themselves make the best decisions. And we can give them all the resources and we can support them with expertise and, you know, our knowledge to help them on the better path and improve those outcomes for those individuals. And it's not a quick fix ever, you know. It's you know, some of our services are about group or individual face-to-face or telephone sessions over a period of weeks to help them improve without needing as much medical intervention as they might have needed otherwise.
So what is the primary job of Mind then? Do you have call centres, or is that something where you're more enabling like the hospitals and the personal the mental first aid carers to deliver good topics? Are you working with the people in distress themselves, or teaching the people that are dealing with people?
So if you were dial back, say 10 years ago, most minds would have said to you, we're about low level intervention, we're not about the crisis stuff, we're not about supporting people in crisis. And by default, because the NHS has less and less resources to deal with that, we've had to step into those spaces. And so like with South Warwickshire and Worcestershire Mind, we provide a safe haven where people can go if they're having suicidal thoughts. We have a triage support line for people who are in crisis, either psychosis or suicidal ideation, whatever that might be, panic attacks. We provide that psychoeducational support, so giving people materials where they can educate themselves about, right, what is anxiety, what can help me with anxiety, check my level of caffeine intake, my nutrition, can I do some mindfulness, can I, whatever that distraction techniques, educating them about that. But really with all of our services, critically, what we're trying to do is empower people, because we can make people feel better in the moment, right? Mm-hmm. We can do that all day long, but we're not actually helping them to move forward. So our job really needs to be about educating people to get the support they need, deserve, and to make the lifestyle changes they need. And in some cases, not all, but in some cases, finding some medication to support them to move forward with their lives.
What do you think's next in terms of what your ambitions are for Mind? So you're new. So obviously you've just kind of like been 3 months in. What have you learned, and what would you love to help improve inside the company of Mind, so that we can, I guess, help more people get the help that they need to?
I think we've already talked about, trying to put ourselves in the minds and thoughts of the people we're trying to help. And for me, I don't want to ever lose that perspective that you have when you first start a new job, which is you have the benefit of like fresh eyes, and you're like, what would I want to use this service for? What would I want the outcome to be? And I think the longer you're in a role, the less visible and obvious that is. You just get stuck in the operational stuff. So for me, it's generally about getting in front of more people who need to use our services, because they're not actually at capacity, and unfortunately they probably should be, with the way people's mental health is right now. Generally they should be using our services more than ever. So particularly we cover Worcestershire as well as South Warwickshire, but specifically in the Stratford and Leamington area and Warwick areas, we've got about 7 or 8 wellbeing or drop-in groups where they're free, they're open to all, and it's principally it's like a non-judgmental ear and a safe space to discuss issues. Some of the groups run, they've got a specific nature. We might be talking about a specific topic, for example, or it might be more user-led, where people come with their kind of concerns or problems, and that will then direct where the group goes. And, obviously we've got Men Connect that's on a Wednesday that helps specifically men. Mm-hmm. And so for me, my main aim has to be getting more people in using the services that we offer, so that we can help more people. And that obviously, from a local community level, has a good knock-on, positive effect on waiting lists and for GP surgeries, and also making sure that services can be used for other things. So it's got a positive effect on the community as a whole, as well as the individuals that need to use their services.
Cool. And
I think probably trying to get to them earlier on as well, so that we can help them before their mental health deteriorates.
Okay.
So, and we're taking lots of positive steps to to facilitate that, and we're recruiting more practitioners to be able to help more people as well. So it's all going in the right direction. So,
but getting to capacity and getting more mentor shows to the great events that you're putting up. Paul, what would you, if you were suddenly in charge of Mind and they said, look, Paul, we want you to run with this, go and help, go and save some lives. What changes would you make?
I think frustratingly, it's really easy. We know what we need to do. We need to innovate, so we need to understand what the role is of AI in the future in terms of mental health provision. We need to educate from a really young age about what is good mental health and how our children and young people can look after their mental health and well-being. We need to change the narrative, so we need to get to a point where, social media does, can do some good. It's not all bad when it comes to our mental health and well-being, but equally we know that some of it can be really toxic, and we think that we need to start holding the social media companies to account on that, so that they are providing safe platforms that include mental health safety as part of their offering. And then it is about providing people, it's about sharing power with people who have got lived experience, who giving them really the choice of what support do they want, where do they want it, when do they need it, and what that support looks like. We know by far and away that sort of support is far more successful than prescribed sort of support. And there was one other thing I was going to say to snatch that out of the jewels of death, and I can't remember what it was. Come back to it, I'm sure. Yeah,
well, something I'd love to know more about your story, by the way, at some point, maybe on a separate, because I think anyone was at the stage of trying to take their own life just 8 years ago, to find yourself doing the great work that you're doing now is always inspirational. So I always want to share those kind of stories as well, because I think I said to you at the start, I'm interested in how a guy can reach rock bottom and then be sat here in front of me today speaking so eloquently and just superbly, and be so passionate about the topic he's in. So I'd love to dive into that, because that's fascinating, and I think those stories are relatable. So if someone is really suffering and they hear your story and you can go and really explain the dark parts that you went to, you'll relate to even more men. And I think
love the dark.
I do.
Secretly.
Not secretly. Not secretly. Yeah, but I understand it, and I think a lot of men do too. This is what we're talking about, but below the depths of the external world, in every man, I think he knows those dark parts. It
resonates, right?
It resonates. Yeah, I think the thing with Stephen Bartlett's podcast, like we said at the start, it's not too relatable anymore with the guests, because multi-billionaires, millionaires have kind of it's the classic obstacle, beat it and I'm winning now. I'm like, this for me, this is a real story, man. Like, this is I just want to know more.
Yeah.
And people often say they like the podcast because it's like being a fly on the wall and just listening to a conversation. So I'd love to pick your brains on all that stuff, if you'd be happy to share that at some point.
Sure.
He doesn't sound too confident at all, or short. But no, I think what I'm saying is I think it's inspirational. I think you have to do the job you're doing. I don't think you can do anything else.
Well, and we hope that podcasts like this can really, really help, and good for you for...
Thank you.
Huge thumbs up for you for diving into this area, because it's not an easy choice to make, right?
No, but it feels natural. And I like to challenge it too, as you can probably tell. I think there's a real sweet spot between personal responsibility and societal changes. I think we can work on both, right? The argument would be, do you start at the bottom up? So do we go individuals, you've got to take, or do we go to the top and go, hold on, you're really not helping people here, It's expensive to eat healthy. It's affordable to eat crap. Blah blah. Do you know what I mean? Do you go to the top, or just start from the bottom, or do you attack both ends and hopefully meet somewhere good in the middle? I don't know. But I love. Is there anything else you want to add before we wrap this up? Is there anything that you really wanted to get across today that I haven't? Whether maybe to direct somebody who might be struggling. Is there anything that you want to add just before we wrap this up?
I think, if you're in South Warwickshire, then www.swwmind.org.uk is there for you. Nationally, mind.org.uk are there for you. There's a ton of other charities like the Campaign Against Living Miserably, Calm, who do great work. For our children and young people, I can't recommend a better charity than Papyrus, who are based in Solihull. They do some brilliant work, but the key message is that there is support out there. There are people prepared to listen to you and accept you without judgment. We just encourage everybody to reach out for that support, because we all deserve better mental health, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you use Facebook or Instagram, we're constantly keeping up to date what services we're providing in the area, and also just other pertinent subjects. So our social media channels, if you just search for South Warwickshire and Worcestershire Mind on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, that's quite helpful. So
cool. And I've said it before, we've got an army of men. If you ever need any help, physical challenges, raising money.
Yeah, definitely. I will be coming back for more information on that once we've got our heads straight about what that event looks like, sure.
We've got an army of guys who would love to help. We really love what you do, and keep doing it.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alex.